Alleluia, Christ is risen. Good morning, sit down. I'm probably going to say that. I'm giving you a heads up. I am probably going to do that for the next few Sundays, or at least the ones that I am preaching during the season of Easter, just as a reminder to you, as well as a reminder to me, that we are still very much in the season of Easter. Yeah? Fair? And well done. You all earned an A+. You passed the test. You knew the response. So well done. Friends, this is only the second Sunday of Easter. Second Sunday of Easter, exactly 7 days post Easter Sunday. A reminder, it's a long feast, right? So if we are in day 7, you are in day 7 of how many days? 57. So you're just at the beginning. Just a reminder, just at the beginning of this feast. Why do I make such a big deal? And Betsy's wondering, why do I make such a big deal out of a 50-day feast? Who here can sustain a daily feasting practice for 50 days? I would argue and submit to you all that probably none of us can last more than 2 or 3 days. And why is that? Why is that? I've been thinking a lot about feasting this year in particular, and thinking about this notion of having to practice feasting, a discipline of joy. Now, most people would look at me and say, anybody can do that, right? Of course, we can. Friends, if you are not practicing it, if you are not intentional about it, it doesn't just happen all by itself. Happy things can happen. Good things can happen. Let's hope more than not, right? But in the end, we are not living as a feasting resurrection people if we are not actually practicing joy and the discipline of the feast. Now, the church does not set us up. The church does not, let me say that again, the church does not set us up very well, because on this Sunday, every year, the church has a funny name, and those of you, the clergy in the room, cannot say it out loud. Those of you who are not clergy, does anyone know what we call this Sunday in the church? Have called it this forever? Low Sunday. Well, there's a good, happy feast day title for you, right? Because the understanding from the church is that we had this huge, beautiful, luscious feast of resurrection and Easter eggs and all of the alleluias last week. Therefore, you all must be so tired. You're not going to come to church this Sunday. Why would you go to church on the Sunday after Easter? Therefore, it is called Low Sunday. Even the church sets us up for failure in this feast. There is another name for this particular Sunday, or what it is known by, and that is from the gospel that I just read, and that is Doubting Thomas. Again, what are we doing as a church? That 7 days into the Eastertide feast, we call it Low Sunday, and we talk about a guy named Doubting Thomas. Not super feasting, right? Or feastful? I don't know. What is the word? What would be the adjective there? Feastable? Festival? On this Sunday, the church for ages has focused on the post-resurrection appearance of Jesus to disciples in the upper room, right? That's great. We want to hear the resurrection appearance stories. And yet, we can't stop focusing on the fact that poor Thomas isn't there and says, yeah, I wasn't here. I need to see it to believe it. And so we've turned this whole beautiful story into a story about doubt or unbelieving, right? Instead of really what it is, which is a resurrection story. It is a post-resurrection appearance. So I want to kind of set the stage for you all for a second. I want you to put on your COVID hats. Do you remember that thing called COVID? Looking at one who was the senior warden of this church during COVID. You remember COVID. I know you do. I want you to think about this for a moment, because most of us have put COVID in the rear view mirror, right? Do you remember what it felt like? Do you remember how that felt? I found, friends, recently something that I wrote about this time in 2020. And it just kind of jumped up. This is certainly how I was feeling at this time. And I just want you to kind of put the COVID hat on and see if you remember these feelings. I wrote, I got home yesterday from my now weekly shopping trip to find that my face was covered in crease marks and lines. I had been out for just under 2 hours, having stopped at 2 stores, and my mask had left grooves and marks all around my face, while my pruned hands, having been hidden in their disposable gloves the whole time, felt that they had been left in the ground to ferment. I looked ridiculous, I wrote, but I was safe. I didn't breathe on anyone or leave my own germs on the cart or credit card machine, and I hoped I didn't breathe in or come into contact with anyone else's germs. No breathing, no touching. These are the rules to keep us all safe. Do you remember that? Where just being next to someone who might have made that noise sent you into hysterics and home to like Lysol your whole body? I think, friends, that was a bit of the setting of this upper room after Jesus was crucified. That fear of anything, of anyone coming into their space, or the disciples out into the space of the marketplace and the streets. There was just this palpable fear. And I very much remember that 2020, this Sunday, I came in probably on Saturday to videotape, because that's where we were at this time, to videotape the liturgy and whatnot. Somebody else, I think, preached and taped that, and we spliced it all together, if you remember. But I remember standing with the gospel book and having my phone on a tripod, right, with a bright light, all of the things that we did, and reading out, the Holy Gospel according to St. John, and beginning to read and hearing myself tell the story of Jesus entering a room full of fear, full of grief, and doing what? Breathing on the disciples and saying, "Peace be with you." Breath and peace. That's what resurrection was. This gift from Christ, who literally walked into the room, you're about the number of disciples, and just walked in and got it all up in their face and said, "Peace be with you." And I remember while I read that story, crying, literally weeping in this sanctuary in front of my phone. I had to do it like 4 times. Delete until I could do it without crying. Because, friends, we had done exactly what the disciples did after the resurrection during COVID. We all went like this. For the good of mankind, for the good of my family, for the good of the neighbors, we're going to step back. And we literally removed ourselves from one another out of fear, out of love. We thought we were being loving and kind by stepping back, and into that Jesus walked in and said, peace be with you. I want you to think about when you have disagreements, or you're in the room with someone who, even if they don't know you're disagreeing with them, or you just don't like them, or whatever it is. Think about your body language, right? If Betsy and I are together and we're having a grand old chat, I'm right next, close, right? Sometimes I'll even hold her hand. I might put my hand up, right? We're close, right? Jim has just irritated. I'm just backing up, right? I don't care what you have to say, Jim. I'm just getting, right? If my husband is saying something I don't want to hear, chances are he's on one side of the kitchen and I'm all the way, by the time he's done, I'm about over here. Like, that's great for you, right? And I just walk away. Resurrection is the celebration of joy. It's the discipline of moving in, of breath, of love, of engagement. It is the exact opposite of locking ourselves up in a room out of fear, out of grief. And that moving in, that embodied moving towards, is something that has to be practiced. Because if we're not practicing it, chances are you're either standing still or you're pedaling backwards, because that's just human nature. It's what we do. It didn't make Thomas any different than any of the other disciples in this state of unbelieving. The disciples didn't believe Mary and the women who brought the first news, right? And Mary, right, was hard pressed to believe the gardener, or whichever gospel, right, setting that you're thinking of, at the tomb. Every human that came into contact with Jesus after the crucifixion and resurrection didn't get it, didn't understand it, was in a place of grief and fear. And he just strolled in and breathed on them. And that was the new life. That was the resurrection. It's pretty amazing that that's what it is. And all of these years, centuries later, we focus on one dude who said, not going to believe it until I see it. Friends, celebrating and practicing joy and resurrection is what we are supposed to do during this. We're supposed to do it all the time. But we're only human. And so the church gave us 50 days. 50 days to be people of resurrection, to be people who walk in and closer instead of stepping back and further away. People who are fixated, focused on finding the joy, not just the happy, but the joy, not just in the good, but in the dark places. This is not easy work. This is hard work. And yet, it is our great joy to celebrate 50 days of feasting. So if you just got through this week by the skin of your whatever, right? Hanging on, right? Like so many people, right? Maybe you had a hard week. Maybe you had a long week. Maybe you thought about Easter on Sunday and then forgot about it until today. You have 6 more weeks. 6 more weeks where at least once a day you lean in instead of stepping back. You trust the breath. Trust the breath of God to push you into that place of feasting and resurrection. Promise it will begin to transform your relationships. You might even try to make it a practice for the rest of the year. Happy Easter.